Good morning, everybody. Thank you for coming. My name is Johan Martinez, and I'm working for Semios as a research agronomist. And today I'm going to talk to you about precision agriculture. And hopefully, by the end of the talk, you will be a step closer to respond to the question of how variable is my orchard. So, why should I care about variation across my orchard? Well, there's three ways to look at this. First, there's the point of view of the efficiencies. There's different inputs that are can be quite expensive, such as water, nutrients, or labor that you don't want to apply in excess because that would decrease the returns. And of course, there's a point in which plants might respond negatively to an increase in inputs such as water or nutrients. The second is the regulations. I think that you all have heard about Sigma. And the third is the responsibility, which the almond industry is taking a great leadership on. So, what is a management zone and why do I care? Management zones are group areas that can be grouped together and they respond in a similar way to inputs. So, the first step to work with management zones is to capture and understand variability, separate that variability into management zones. And finally, these management zones, you have to find a way to optimize the way you work with them to maximize inputs and returns. So how can I capture variation across my orchard? There's four different things that I cluster here in four boxes. The first one is the manual samplings, and I took as an example the nutrient analysis. Most of you probably already do this. And you can take this as an example, but there's many others, such as, for instance, taking yield assessments or record flowering. It doesn't have to be something complicated. The second one is the proximal sensing. Here the example is the electrical conductivity measured by the EM38. That's something very helpful to understand what's the pattern in the distribution of salinity. Then we have the remote sensing, which I took as an example the satellite images. And finally, the fixed sensors. Fixed sensors, I was not fully aware of this, but 2 years ago we tried this in one of our experiments. I remember we put 40 data loggers, and it was really hard to keep up with that infrastructure. Like we had to keep one of a member of the team downloading the data one day every 2 weeks, and that took the entire day, and it was quite laborious. Um, but here we have the pheromone dispensers that we have here at Semios, and those dispensers they can of course release pheromones for mating disruption, but also they have some sort of small weather station inside, so they record a temperature and relative humidity. So, uh, getting a bit in deep into the manual samplings, these are things that are very scattered across the field, so that has a very low resolution, and it can be also very precise. So that's a trade-off that we have there, and it's those samplings are also can be quite costly if you do many of them, and of course they take some time to sample. I also say that they are susceptible to bias, and that doesn't have to be necessarily a bad thing, but when you send somebody to sample, that sampling protocol has to be always the same. So if that person samples a different side of the orchard, a different amount of trees, or in a slightly different way, the results can be changing a lot, and that is hard to keep standardized across an entire organization through time. Here we have the example of electrical conductivity a bit more in deep, and it's really fast. If you start doing the sampling, if you have everything well organized, you could have the data available by the end of the day, and that data is long lasting in the sense that electrical conductivity is not something that changes very much year after year. But of course, there is an initial investment. This device is expensive, and you need to have some GIS experience. But also, you could contract this, and in that case, there will be a cost of that. When we talk about remote sensing, many of you might have some contact with this area. Here I put the example of elevation. Nowadays, most of the elevation data that is available, it has been collected with a radar-like technology. So it's not coming from a survey. And here I have the NDVI, which is a vegetation index, in which we can see that it enhances that some part of the orchard has a bit more bigger, or the trees have bigger canopies compared to this other over here. Uh, in case of this kind of information, it's really available and it's historical. So there's many years of historical data about this. But the problem might be that it's hard to access. It's not available to everyone, at least right now, and you need some GIS experience to handle the data. When we talk about fixed sensors, here at Semios, we have 13 different sensors that we can set up. We have talked about the pheromone dispensers, but we also have dendrometers, weather stations, pressure transducers, and all these are clustered into different categories such as climatic sensors, plant health, water status, and irrigation. And when you combine all this, there's an unparalleled granularity that I don't think there's anything like this in the market right now. So this is an example of what the data from the pheromone dispensers can produce. We have here an adjustment of crop evapotranspiration, uh, very granular, and we can see here that there's a pattern in which there's a bit of more water demand in the center of the orchard and in this corner over here. So understanding whether your variation can be translated into management zones is really important. That means because not all the variability is worth managing. Here we have an example in which it's clearly worth managing, and it's because it's very persistent. We have here 6 years of data, and this 6 years of data, we can see a very cluster pattern in which the northeast of the block has a different water status. These are thermal images. So having a cooler color means that there's plants transpiring more in that section. So this have a better water status. So we can see that in 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, and 2020. This pattern is constant, and that means that that's a variability that is worth managing because it's likely that it's going to be repeated on 2021, and whatever decision that we take, we can keep them for long periods. So why is this happening? You might wonder. Well, the contour has a great blame on this, and it's not because we have different elevation and part of the orchard is really high and it's cooler. Um, that might be the case when the difference in elevation is high, but here we have only 40 feet difference between the highest part over here to the lowest part. And what is going on is that when we have these subtle differences in elevation, there's a different access to the underground water table. So when we have valley-like sections like this, the trees have better access to the water table. And also, small soil particles and nutrients tend to travel to those zones through the runoff or other processes. So these zones, in principle, might have more water available, but that doesn't mean that you can just stick to that and think like, oh, I'm going to have a better growth there or better yields always there. Sometimes being closer to the water table might mean to have water logging, and in that case, that will have a deleterious effect. So you have to be aware of that and do some sort of ground truthing of what you are seeing. So this is, for instance, one of the times that we did a ground truthing of this pattern. I took here the thermal images of 2020. This is the average for the whole year. And here we have a stem water potential interpolated for one date. These are bars. And you can see that the part that I said that it was under less water stress, it really has a lighter color, meaning that the stem water potentials are lower. So how can I address this variation? Here in Semios, we are doing at the research level this project in which we collect field samples. I put the example of the leaf analysis, but also we collect yields and other things, and we pass this through a machine learning approach using all the other approaches that I talked to you about today. We end up having this very granular understanding of variation in which we know almost the nitrogen or the yield that every tree could have. So the process to work with this data next is that we cluster the data. Here I have the example of yield and nitrogen, and I cluster it into two values instead of having all this range that it's sometimes hard to look at. And we can see here that red is the lower part, lower values of nitrogen, and we can see that this part in the east concentrates most of the lower values of nitrogen, and it happens the same for the yields. However, we have a patch here in the northwest in which the values of nitrogen are pretty low, but still the yields are acceptable. So we have figured out that these two zones might need a slightly different management, whereas the rest of the block, uniform management could be enough. So this is the data that we collected, and it was nice to see that there was a good correlation between nitrogen and yield. And the first thing that it might strike you is that the nitrogen values are pretty low. We are talking about an orchard that comes from a deficiency that we have to correct. So in this case, we are going to work towards increasing the amount of nitrogen applied. If we were on a situation where there was too much nitrogen, we will look into ways to reduce the amount of nitrogen, whereas not reducing yields. But here is the opposite. So in the first place, we have this zone in the west that we said that it was different, and we can see that how much these values are concentrated in the lower part of the nitrogen values, and these also have low values in yield. In the other hand, we have this other region, the blue region in the northwest, that has higher values of yield, but still the nitrogen is low. So we might think that there's something else going on in that region, and not only nitrogen is governing the limitation of yield in this orchard. So exactly, one of the things that you can look at is the water availability. And although this orchard has been watered uniformly, that doesn't mean that all the trees have the same amount of water available. Sometimes subtle differences in soil can make this difference, and we can see that here very well, where all the west area, and especially north, is consuming more water. This is a this is real evapotranspiration. And here we have the thermal images that suggest a similar thing, that the section in the east is consuming less water. So finally, we confirm that through other ways. Of course, we measure some water potential, but I wanted to share something really special here, which is the shriveling of the almonds. So these almonds in the east section had 2% of them were shriveled, and you might think, okay, 2% is not much for me, or is a lot. Maybe I can get rid of them in the processing plant. All that is true, but you have to think this as the tip of the iceberg. If you have a 2% shriveled almonds, that means that there is a great percentage of the almonds that didn't reach the desirable size, and probably the yields of these trees are much smaller. We saw that in the slide before, but here is much clearer because we can see that the section on the blue zone over here, this really did not have any increase in dribbling, which means that these ones probably are trees with a very good water status. So basically, that was the great difference between these two zones, the blue and the red, and is water availability, um, which is much higher in the blue zone than in the red zone. We got that confirmed by other means. Here we have soil moisture. And the first thing that it might strike you is that there's very big difference between the blue and the red, but that difference is almost none after the big rains came around Thanksgiving. So what you have to picture here in your head is that the red zone did not have a lot of water availability at this point. So every time we put water from irrigation, the tree that had only that water to consume. So it put both hands on it and it consumed it right away. Whereas in the blue zone, it had many other places where to store water, and the roots had many options to take water from. So it was not consuming that water right away, and these dips were not so dramatic as it was in the red zone. So I want to wrap everything up around this concept. We had two different management zones, and it was only possible to understand that we had the situation by looking at all the data combined. So it is important to know that no single piece of information is going to give you this approach. And the idea here will be to manage blocks in a different way, in which we will apply slightly higher amount of nitrogen in the blocks in the red zone and in the block in the blue zone. And in the case of the red zone, this will be a good candidate to maybe increase the irrigation amounts because the soil here is making this tree is having a hard time to be at the same water status as the blue zone. So the future check technology and control, how this can help us. You might have noticed that I talked about specific blocks, and you could separate the management zones into blocks. That would be the most simple way to work with this. But of course, you could divide a block into different management zones and have different management depending on what tree, if a tree is in one zone or another. And that would need some sort of control that we might not have right now. But much of this technology is already available for row crops. Um, and what we believe is really a limitation is right now the informed input that these technologies need to use. And we're going to try to cover that gap and try to, we have partnered with many companies that are working on the control of different systems. And hopefully some of that work is going to crystallize into an advanced way of manage things in a more precise way. So let's recap. Semios is the home to a diverse agronomic data set. We are trying to host all your samplings in a spatial way, host data that you might be hiring with somebody that operates, for instance, electrical conductivity, and host all this aerial and satellite images. No single source of this information will give you a full understanding of it. So that's why we think that it's very important to cluster all this together and integrate them in a way that we simplify all this analysis to be used at the commercial level. And remember that data is only valuable in hands of those who know what to do with it. Even though there's a lot of information that you can acquire out there, only if you do the right analysis is going to be meaningful for you. So be really aware of this. So thank you very much. I really encourage you to watch the other presentation that my partner Anthony Mele has about sensors and how to get the best out of them. And I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you very much.